grandmother's caretaker convinced everyone she had dementia so he could steal her money. He didn't know I was secretly recording everything. His name was Vincent, and he'd worked for Grandma Iris for 8 months when I started noticing things. Small things at first. The way she'd suddenly forget conversations we'd had the day before, but only when Vincent was in the room. How she'd seem confused about her finances during family meetings, yet could recite her entire portfolio to me over the phone when he was out running errands. Vincent had come highly recommended. He was 38, spoke softly, and had this way of making everyone feel reassured. My uncle trusted him completely. My aunt called him a godsend. But I'd been visiting 3 times a week, and I saw the pattern. Grandma would be sharp as ever when we were alone, talking about her investments, her upcoming trip to Charleston. The second Vincent entered, she'd trail off mid-sentence, look confused, and ask what day it was. The first time I caught on was during Sunday dinner. Vincent mentioned that Grandma had gotten lost in her own garden that morning, wandering around calling for her husband who'd been dead for 15 years. My mom gasped. My uncle immediately started talking about memory care facilities. Except I'd been there that morning. Grandma and I had pruned roses together for 2 hours. She'd told me detailed stories about the garden club's upcoming competition. She never mentioned Grandpa once. I started documenting everything. I bought a pen camera for $89 on Amazon and wore it clipped to my shirt during every visit. I recorded our conversations when Vincent wasn't there. Grandma discussing stock dividends, Grandma planning her will with perfect clarity. Then I recorded what happened when Vincent showed up. The sudden confusion, the repetitive questions, the real evidence came 3 weeks into my surveillance. I'd installed a hidden camera in Grandma's study. I watched him on the footage. He'd wait until Grandma was napping, then systematically photograph her bank statements, investment portfolios, and insurance policies. He'd forge her signature on checks, his hand steady and practiced. Over 8 months, he'd stolen $340,000 through forged checks, transferred funds, and convincing Grandma to sign documents she thought were medical consent forms, but were actually power of attorney papers. I compiled everything into a folder. The videos, the financial records, the timestamps showing Grandma's clarity versus her sudden decline in Vincent's presence. I had 36 hours of footage total. The family meeting was scheduled for Thursday. Vincent had suggested it, of course. He wanted to discuss moving Grandma to memory care. My uncle had already toured facilities. My mom was crying about losing her mother to dementia. I showed up early and connected my laptop to the TV. When everyone arrived, Vincent sat beside Grandma, his hand on her shoulder. He started his presentation about Grandma's declining mental state, his voice full of compassionate concern. I let him talk for 10 minutes. Then I pressed play. The room went silent as they watched Grandma, perfectly lucid, discussing her investments with me on Tuesday. Then Vincent entering, the immediate confusion, then the study footage, Vincent forging signatures, making calls, transferring money. My uncle's face went red. Vincent's expression never changed, but his hand tightened on Grandma's shoulder. "This is manipulated," he said calmly. "She's confused and making accusations." That's when Grandma stood up, perfectly steady, perfectly clear. "I've been pretending for 3 months," she said, waiting for someone to notice. The room erupted. Vincent tried to leave, but my uncle blocked the door. We called the police. They arrived within 20 minutes and arrested Vincent on the spot. Fraud, forgery, elder abuse. That's when Vincent's lawyer showed up the next morning with something that made my blood run cold. He had documents proving Vincent hadn't been working alone. He had a partner, someone in our family. The lawyer's name was Mitchell Crane. He arrived at 8 a.m. with a leather briefcase and an expression that suggested he'd done this many times before. My uncle answered the door. My mom was making coffee in the kitchen. Grandma sat in her armchair, looking more tired than I'd seen her in months. "We need to discuss a settlement," Mitchell said, spreading papers across the dining room table. "My client is willing to return a portion of the funds in exchange for dropped charges." My uncle laughed, a bitter sound. "Your client is going to prison." Mitchell didn't flinch. He slid a document across the table. "Perhaps, but he won't be going alone." The document was a bank statement, not Grandma's, my aunt's. It showed deposits totaling $85,000 over the past 8 months, dates that corresponded exactly with Vincent's thefts from Grandma's accounts. My aunt went pale. "That's not what it looks like." "Then what is it?" I asked. She couldn't answer. My mom set down her coffee cup so hard it cracked. "You knew? You helped him?" My aunt started crying. "He said it was just borrowing. He said Grandma wouldn't miss it. She has so much and we needed help with the medical bills. Dad's cancer treatments were draining us. So you sold out your own mother?" My uncle's voice was shaking. "You helped this man gaslight her? Make us think she was losing her mind?" "It wasn't supposed to go that far," my aunt whispered. "At first, he just asked me to let him know when Grandma would be alone, when she'd be vulnerable to signing things. I didn't know he was going to make everyone think she had dementia. But you figured it out," I said, "and you kept quiet." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He said if I told anyone, he'd make sure everyone knew I was involved, that I'd lose everything. My kids would know what I'd done." Grandma hadn't said a word through all of this. She just stared at my aunt with an expression I couldn't read. Finally, she spoke. "How much did he pay you?" My aunt couldn't look at her. 15% of everything he took. So $51,000, I calculated. You sold your mother's dignity for $51,000. Mitchell cleared his throat. "My client is prepared to testify against Mrs. Brennan here in exchange for a reduced sentence. Unless, of course, the family would prefer to handle this privately." "Get out," my uncle said. "We're not making any deals." After Mitchell left, we sat in silence. My aunt kept trying to explain, to justify, but every word made it worse. She'd known for 6 months. She'd watched Vincent manipulate Grandma. She'd even suggested the memory care facility when she thought the investigation was getting too close. Mom couldn't look at her own sister. I kept thinking about all those family dinners where my aunt had sat there, concerned face, supportive words, while knowing exactly what was happening. We called our own lawyer. Her name was Patricia Gomez, and she specialized in elder abuse cases. She reviewed everything that evening, the videos, the bank statements, Mitchell's settlement offer. "This is prosecutable," Patricia said. "Both of them. Your aunt could face 10 to 15 years. My mom started crying. She's my sister. "She's also an accessory to elder abuse and fraud," Patricia said gently. "I understand this is painful, but the law is clear." The next week was a blur of police statements and legal consultations. Vincent was denied bail. My aunt was arrested at her home while her kids watched. She called my mom from jail, begging for help with bail money. Mom hung up without a word, but the damage went deeper than money. Grandma stopped sleeping. She'd wander the house at 3 a.m., checking doors and windows. Every time someone came to visit, she'd tense up. She started questioning everything, her own judgment, her ability to trust. I moved in with her. My apartment lease was up anyway, and she needed someone there. Not a caretaker, just someone she knew wouldn't hurt her. The preliminary hearing was set for 6 weeks out. Patricia warned us it would be brutal. Vincent's defense was already claiming Grandma was actually suffering from dementia and had fabricated the whole pretending scenario, that my videos were selectively edited to show her at her best moments. "We need a full cognitive evaluation," Patricia explained. "Independent doctors. Multiple tests. It's the only way to prove definitively that she's competent." Grandma underwent 3 weeks of testing, memory assessments, cognitive function tests, psychiatric evaluations. She scored in the 95th percentile for her age group. The doctors found 0 evidence of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any cognitive decline, but the testing exhausted her. Every night she'd come home depleted, questioning whether she was actually okay. "What if they're right?" she'd ask. "What if I am confused and just don't realize it?" "You're not," I'd say. "You never were." That was the whole point of Vincent's plan. Make everyone else doubt you so much that you start doubting yourself. The trial began on a Tuesday in October. The courthouse was old, with wooden benches and fluorescent lights that buzzed. Vincent wore a suit and looked remorseful. My aunt wore black and wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. The prosecution went first. They showed the videos. All 36 hours, condensed into a 90-minute presentation. The jury watched Grandma's transformation, sharp and clear when alone, confused and disoriented with Vincent. The timestamps proved the pattern was deliberate. Then they showed the financial records, the forged signatures, the transferred funds, the bank deposits into my aunt's account. Vincent's lawyer tried to argue that Grandma had consented to the financial transactions, that she'd been confused about them later due to her declining mental state, but the cognitive test destroyed that defense. My aunt's lawyer tried a different approach. She'd been manipulated too. Vincent had preyed on her financial desperation. She'd believed him when he said it was temporary borrowing. The jury didn't buy it. They deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Vincent got 18 years. My aunt got 12. The sentencing hearing was worse than the trial. My aunt's kids testified, begging for leniency. My mom sobbed in the back row. My uncle sat stone-faced, refusing to speak on his sister's behalf. When the judge asked if Grandma wanted to make a statement, she stood slowly. Her voice was steady. "My daughter didn't just steal my money. She stole my reality. She made my own family question my sanity. She watched me suffer and did nothing. I have lost a daughter. Not to death, but to greed. And that might be worse." My aunt collapsed. The bailiffs had to help her out of the courtroom. That night, Grandma and I sat on her back porch. The garden was overgrown. She hadn't felt like maintaining it since everything happened. "Do you think I'm too harsh?" she asked. "No," I said. "I think you're honest." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "I keep waiting to feel relieved. The trial's over, justice was served. But I just feel empty." The money was recovered, most of it. Vincent had spent about $80,000 on gambling, and a boat he'd kept docked in Florida. My aunt had used her portion for medical bills, which meant it was gone. The court ordered restitution, but neither of them had assets. The insurance company wanted to settle. They'd initially denied Grandma's claim, saying she'd willingly signed the transfer documents. But the trial evidence changed everything. They offered $200,000. Patricia advised taking it. Litigation could drag on for years. Grandma took the settlement. Then she did something unexpected. She split it 3 ways. 1/3 to me, 1/3 to charity, 1/3 into a trust for my aunt's kids. Accessible only after they turned 25 and only for education or housing. Mom was furious. "Those kids have a mother who chose this. They're also innocent," Grandma said. "And their family." My uncle stopped speaking to Grandma entirely. He thought she was being too soft, that my aunt's kids should suffer the consequences of their mother's choices. Christmas that year was just Grandma, Mom, and me, the smallest gathering in 40 years. But slowly, things stabilized. Grandma started gardening again. Small sections at first, just the roses, then the herbs. By spring, the whole yard was coming back to life. She joined a seniors book club and started volunteering at the library. I got promoted at work, used part of the settlement money to finish my master's degree. Moved into a bigger place but still visited Grandma 4 times a week. We never talked about Vincent or my aunt unless Grandma brought it up, which was rare. Then, 18 months after the trial, I got a letter, prison mail, from my aunt. She'd written 40 pages, front and back. Most of it was apologies, some of it was explanations. The last page was different. Vincent had a backup plan, she wrote. Before he was arrested, he told me he'd hidden something. Insurance, he called it. Evidence that would bring down more than just us. He said if anything happened to him, his brother knew where to find it. I didn't believe him then. But 3 weeks ago, his brother contacted me. He has documents, bank records showing the money didn't just go to me. There were other deposits, other family members. My hands shook as I read the last line. I think your uncle was involved too. I showed the letter to Grandma. Her face went carefully blank. She read it 3 times. Then she folded it and handed it back. Do you believe her? I don't know, I said. She lied about everything else. But Vincent was methodical. Having insurance makes sense. Grandma was quiet for a long time. If it's true, if your uncle was involved, it means he let his own sister take the fall alone. He stood in that courtroom and said nothing while she went to prison. We need to investigate, I said. Grandma shook her head. We need to let it go. But if Uncle Nathan was stealing from you too, then I've already lost enough, Grandma interrupted. I lost my daughter. I lost my trust. I lost 2 years of my life to fear and confusion. I won't lose anything else chasing shadows. She stood up and walked to the window. The garden was in full bloom. She'd planted new flowers that spring, colors she'd never tried before. I'm 79 years old, she said. However many years I have left, I want to spend them in peace. Not in more courtrooms. Not unraveling more betrayals. But the letter haunted me. I couldn't let it go the way Grandma could. I hired a private investigator. His name was Felix Torres, and he'd worked financial crimes for 20 years before going private. I gave him everything. The letter. The trial transcripts. Vincent's known associates. Felix worked quietly for 3 months. He found bank records Vincent had kept as collateral, offshore accounts, shell companies, and transfers that went beyond just my aunt. My uncle had received $125,000 over the same 8-month period. He'd been the one who recommended Vincent in the first place. The agency Vincent supposedly came from? It existed, but Vincent had never worked there. My uncle had fabricated the reference. It went deeper. My uncle had been the one pushing hardest for memory care placement. He toured facilities that cost $8,000 per month. Once Grandma was locked away, unable to manage her own affairs, he would have had complete control as her power of attorney. Felix laid out the documentation in my apartment. This is prosecutable, he said. Strong case. Stronger than what they had against your aunt. I sat with the evidence for 2 days. Then I drove to the prison where my aunt was serving her sentence. Visiting hours were strict. She looked older, thinner. Her hair had gone completely gray. She cried when she saw me. I didn't think you'd come. I didn't think I would either, I said. Then I slid the documentation across the table. Tell me everything. My aunt talked for the full 90-minute visit. She'd suspected my uncle from the beginning. He'd been the one to connect her with Vincent, to assure her it was safe, that Grandma would never notice. When things started unraveling, my uncle had been the one who told her to stay quiet, to take the fall alone. He'd promised to take care of her kids while she was inside. He'd promised financial support. He hasn't given them a cent, my aunt said. He won't return their calls. When my oldest needed emergency dental work last month, he told them to ask their father. Their father left us 6 years ago. Did you tell anyone about his involvement? I asked. Who would believe me? She laughed bitterly. I'm a convicted felon. He's a respected businessman. Even my own lawyer told me pointing fingers at family would make me look worse. I could take this to the prosecutor, I said. Reopen the investigation. My aunt grabbed my hand. Her grip was desperate. If you do that, it destroys your mother. Your uncle is her brother, her only remaining sibling after me. She's already lost so much. I pulled away. She lost it because you took it. I know. My aunt's voice broke. I know what I did, and I'll spend 12 years paying for it. But your mother is innocent. Don't make her pay too. I left the prison more confused than when I'd arrived. I had evidence of my uncle's guilt, clear documentation, but using it meant tearing apart what little was left of our family. Mom had just started healing. She'd gone back to her book club, started painting again. She'd even been talking about planning a trip to Italy next year, something she'd always wanted to do. Finding out her brother had been involved would destroy her. But my aunt was serving 12 years for a crime she hadn't committed alone, and my uncle was free, living his life, probably still stealing from Grandma or planning his next scheme. I made an appointment with Patricia Gomez, showed her everything Felix had found. She reviewed it methodically, making notes. Then she leaned back in her chair. This changes everything. With this evidence, we could petition for your aunt's sentence to be reduced. She could be out in 3 years instead of 12. What about my uncle, I asked. He'd be arrested, prosecuted. He'd likely get 15 to 20 years given that he was the architect of the scheme. And what about Grandma? Does she have to testify again? Patricia nodded. Yes. This would mean another trial. More publicity. More trauma. I thought about Grandma in her garden, how she'd finally found peace, how she'd explicitly said she wanted no more investigations, no more courtrooms. I thought about Mom laughing at dinner last week, really laughing, for the first time in 2 years. Then I thought about my aunt in that gray prison uniform, her kids growing up without their mother, The injustice of her serving time while my uncle walked free. What if I don't pursue this? I asked Patricia. What if I just sit on the evidence? Then your uncle gets away with it, Patricia said simply. And your aunt serves the full sentence. And you spend the rest of your life knowing you could have done something but chose not to. There's no good choice here, I said. No, Patricia agreed. There isn't. I drove to Grandma's house that night. She was in the kitchen making soup. The house smelled like rosemary and garlic. She took one look at my face and turned off the stove. You found something, she said. I showed her everything, the bank records, the shell companies, my uncle's involvement, his role as the architect. I told her about my visit with my aunt, about the choice I was facing. Grandma read through the documents slowly. Her expression never changed. When she finished, she folded her hands on the table. What do you want to do? I want justice, I said. But I don't want to destroy what's left of our family. Justice already happened, Grandma said quietly. 2 people went to prison. We recovered most of the money. My cognitive health was proven. The story became public. That was justice. But my uncle got away with it. Grandma's voice was firm. Yes, people get away with things all the time. That's life. The question isn't whether he deserves to be punished. He does. The question is what punishment will cost and whether you're willing to pay that price. I don't understand. Another trial means your mother loses her last sibling. It means I spend another year of my life in courtrooms reliving trauma. It means your aunt's kids become public spectacles again. It means you become the person who tore apart the family for the sake of perfect justice. She paused. Is that price worth it? So we just let him win? I asked. He didn't win, Grandma said. He's living with what he did. That's punishment enough. I wasn't convinced. How do you know he feels guilty? He seemed perfectly fine at the trial. He condemned his own sister while knowing he was equally guilty. Grandma smiled sadly. I've lived 79 years. I've learned something about guilt. The people who show it aren't usually the ones who feel it deepest. The ones who seem fine are often drowning. I went home that night with the evidence still in my bag. I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about justice and family and what we owe to each other. About whether exposing one evil was worth creating another harm. By morning, I'd made my decision. I called my uncle, asked to meet for coffee. He seemed surprised but agreed. We met at a diner near his office. He ordered eggs and toast, talked about work, about Mom, about how good it was that Grandma was doing better. He was friendly, concerned, the perfect brother and son. I let him talk for 15 minutes. Then I slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were copies of everything Felix had found. Bank records, transfer documents, shell company registrations, all of it traced back to him. My uncle went pale. Where did you get this? Does it matter? I asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Look, I can explain. I don't want explanations, I interrupted. I want you to listen. I have the originals of everything in that envelope. Multiple copies stored in different locations. If anything happens to me, they go directly to the prosecutor. Understood? He nodded slowly. Good. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to set up a trust fund for my aunt's kids. $250,000. Enough to cover their education and get them started in life. You're going to write Grandma a check for $125,000, the exact amount you stole, and you're going to arrange for my aunt's legal team to petition for early release based on new mitigating evidence. That's not mitigating evidence, my uncle said weakly. That's evidence I was involved. Correct. Which means if you don't do exactly what I'm asking, I go to the prosecutor today. Your choice. My uncle stared at the envelope. His hands were shaking. You'd really send me to prison? Your own uncle? You sent your own sister to prison while you stayed free, I said. So yes, easily. He tried several more angles. Bargaining, explaining how the money had been invested and couldn't be liquidated quickly, promising to pay it back slowly. I shut down every argument. 2 weeks. Everything completed. Or I go public. He completed it in 10 days. The trust was established. The check was delivered to Grandma with a note about wanting to help with her recovery costs. My aunt's lawyer filed the petition, citing new evidence that her co-conspirator had coerced her participation, and she'd taken full blame under duress. My aunt was released 18 months later. She'd served a total of 3 years. When she walked out of prison, her kids were waiting. And so was a check for $50,000 that my uncle had been required to provide for her reintegration. She called me that night. I don't know how you did this, she said, but thank you. I didn't do it for you, I said. I did it for your kids. And because 12 years was excessive when you weren't the only guilty party. She was quiet for a moment. Does Grandma know? She knows, I said. And she's decided she wants nothing to do with you. That hasn't changed. Your punishment may have been reduced, but her forgiveness hasn't been earned. I understand, my aunt said softly. I'm grateful for even this much. My uncle and I maintained a careful distance after that. We both showed up to family events. We were polite, civil, but we never spoke about what happened. Mom sensed something had shifted but never asked directly. Grandma accepted the check with knowing eyes. She didn't ask questions, just deposited it and donated half to the elder abuse prevention charity she'd become involved with. 2 years after my aunt's release, she started her own business, a consulting service helping families identify financial abuse of elderly relatives. She spoke at conferences, trained social workers, used her experience to prevent what had happened to Grandma from happening to others. She sent Grandma an invitation to one of her first speaking engagements. Grandma didn't respond, but I went. I sat in the back and watched my aunt tell 200 people about her crime, about her choices, about how easy it had been to justify betrayal when she needed money. Afterward, she saw me in the crowd, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I'm not here for you," I replied. "I'm here to make sure you're actually doing the work." She nodded, understood that this was all she'd get from me, and maybe it was enough. Years passed. Grandma turned 85. Her garden won an award from the city's horticultural society. She started teaching gardening classes to other seniors. She'd found purpose beyond what had been stolen from her. Mom finally took her trip to Italy. She sent postcards from Rome, Florence, Venice. She sounded happy, lighter than she'd been in decades. My uncle developed heart problems. Not serious, but enough that he had to slow down. He sold his business and moved to a smaller house. We still maintained our careful distance. I never told anyone else about his involvement. That knowledge was mine to carry. My aunt's kids graduated college. Both of them. The trust fund my uncle had been forced to establish paid for everything. They didn't know about the coercion behind the trust. They thought it was generosity. That was fine with me. On Grandma's 87th birthday, the whole family gathered. My aunt wasn't invited, but she sent a card. She did that every year now. Grandma never acknowledged them, but she didn't throw them away either. They sat in a drawer in her desk, unopened but kept. Mom asked me once why I thought Grandma kept them. I said I didn't know, but I suspected it was because some part of her wanted to forgive, but hadn't figured out how yet. Or maybe she was waiting for my aunt to stop asking for forgiveness and just live a life worth forgiving. The garden party that year was beautiful. Grandma had planted a section of evening primrose that only bloomed at dusk. We stayed late to watch them open, one by one, pale yellow petals unfolding in the fading light. "This is what I wanted," Grandma said to me as we stood watching. "Not revenge, not perfect justice, just this. My garden, my family, peace." She was right, I realized. The evidence I'd gathered against my uncle was still locked away. I'd thought about destroying it 100 times but never had. It felt like insurance, like leverage. But really, it was just weight. That night, I went home and burned it all. The bank records, the shell company documents, everything Felix had found. I watched them turn to ash in my fireplace. It felt like release. The next day, I called Felix. Told him to destroy his copies too. He tried to argue that I might need them someday. I said I was sure. Some things are better let go than held on to. But I kept one thing. The letter my aunt had sent from prison. The one that started everything. I kept it as a reminder. Not of betrayal, but of choice. Of the moment when I'd had to decide what kind of justice mattered more. Perfect or practical. Absolute or possible. Grandma died 3 years later. She was 90. Peaceful in her sleep after a day spent in her garden. She'd been planting bulbs for next spring. Tulips. The ones she'd complained about the neighbor's dog digging up all those years ago. The funeral was well attended. My aunt came but sat in the back. She didn't approach the family. Didn't speak. Just sat quietly through the service and left before the reception. My uncle gave the eulogy. He talked about Grandma's strength and resilience. About how she'd overcome adversity with grace. He didn't mention that he'd been part of that adversity. No one did. After everyone left, I stayed to help Mom pack up Grandma's house. In her desk drawer, we found something unexpected. All of my aunt's cards. Not just unopened, as I'd thought. Grandma had opened every single one, read them, made notes in the margins. Some of the notes were angry, harsh, but others were softer, questioning, wondering. By the last few cards, the notes had changed entirely. They were about forgiveness. About what it means to hold on to pain versus letting it go. About whether redemption is something you grant or something you earn. The final card had just one note in Grandma's handwriting. "Maybe someday." Mom cried when she read it. I don't know if it makes me happy or sad that she was considering forgiving her. "Both," I said. "It can be both." We found something else in the desk. A letter addressed to me. Grandma's handwriting. "To be opened after I'm gone," it said on the envelope. I waited until I got home to read it. Sat on my couch with a glass of wine and Grandma's careful script. The letter was short. She thanked me for everything I'd done. For believing her when no one else did. For getting justice when it mattered. Then she wrote something that made me stop breathing. "I know what you did for your aunt. I know about your uncle. I know you made choices that weren't easy or clean. Thank you for protecting your mother from those choices. Thank you for understanding that sometimes the right thing isn't the legal thing or the perfect thing. It's just the possible thing. The thing that lets everyone keep living. You gave us all that gift. Don't regret it." I read the letter 5 times. Then I put it in my own desk drawer, next to the letter from my aunt that had started everything. 2 letters. 2 different kinds of truth. Both necessary. Both incomplete. Life moved forward the way it does. My aunt continued her work. My uncle's health declined further. He died 2 years after Grandma. Heart attack. Sudden. At his funeral, people talked about his generosity, his business acumen, his love of family. My aunt attended that funeral too. Front row this time. She'd earned that much. After the service, she approached me. First time we'd spoken directly in years. "I never thanked you properly," she said, "for whatever you did to get me out early. To help my kids. I didn't do it for thanks," I said. "I know, but I'm grateful anyway." She paused. "He knew, didn't he? Your uncle. He knew what you had on him." I didn't confirm or deny. Just said, "Sometimes knowing is enough." She nodded. Understood that was all the information she'd get. As she walked away, she turned back once, For what it's worth, I really am sorry. Not just for getting caught, for all of it. I believe you, I said. And I think Grandma did too, eventually. That seemed to matter to her, more than any forgiveness I could offer. She left the funeral looking lighter. Not unburdened, but lighter. Years later, I was helping Mom move into a smaller condo. In the process, we found old photo albums, pictures of our family before everything fell apart, Christmas mornings, summer vacations, ordinary moments that felt impossibly precious now. In one photo, Grandma stood in her garden, my aunt beside her, both of them laughing at something off camera. They looked happy, uncomplicated, before money and betrayal and prison changed everything. Do you ever miss how things were? Mom asked, holding the photo. Sometimes, I said, but I don't know if it was ever really like that, or if we just didn't see the cracks yet. Mom nodded slowly. Your grandmother said something similar once. After the trial, she said the past looks simpler when you're looking backward, but it was probably always complicated. We just didn't know it yet. We packed the albums carefully, kept them all, even the pictures with my aunt, even the ones with my uncle, because they were still family, still part of our story, and erasing them wouldn't change what happened. It would just make the story incomplete. I thought about that a lot in the following years, about completion versus perfection, about how we tell ourselves stories about our families, about who was good and who was bad and where the lines really are. The truth was messier. My aunt had done terrible things but also tried to make amends. My uncle had done terrible things and hidden behind respectability. Grandma had been victimized but also found strength. Mom had been caught in the middle but emerged intact. And me? I'd done what I thought was right at the time, made choices that weren't clean or simple. Choices I still wasn't sure about some days. But they were mine, and they'd gotten us here, to this imperfect, complicated, still-standing family. My aunt's business grew. She eventually wrote a book about financial elder abuse. It became a resource for social workers nationwide. She sent me a copy with an inscription. Thank you for giving me the chance to do something meaningful with my mistakes. She didn't ask me to read it. Didn't ask for feedback. Just acknowledged the gift of opportunity. I read it anyway. It was honest. Unflinchingly so. She detailed her own crime, her justifications, her rationalizations, how easy it had been to convince herself she was doing the right thing when she was really just doing the convenient thing. The book ended with a chapter on redemption, not as absolution, but as action, as living every day in a way that honored the harm you'd caused by preventing it from happening to others. It was good work, important work. It didn't erase what she'd done, but it mattered anyway. On the 10-year anniversary of Vincent's arrest, I visited Grandma's grave. The headstone was simple, just her name and dates. I'd planted tulips around it, the kind she loved, the kind the neighbor's dog used to dig up. They came back every spring now, reliable, persistent, beautiful. I told her about everything that had happened since she'd died, about my aunt's book, about my uncle's death, about Mom's life, about how the garden at her old house, now owned by someone else, was still beautiful. The new owners had kept it up. Maybe they knew its history, maybe they didn't. Either way, they honored it. Then I told her about the choice I'd made, about exposing my uncle privately instead of publicly, about the years of carrying that secret, about how I still wasn't sure if I'd done the right thing. The wind picked up. The tulips swayed. Somewhere a bird was singing. I like to think Grandma would have approved, not because the choice was perfect, but because it was kind. And sometimes kindness matters more than justice. Sometimes mercy is its own form of truth. I left the cemetery as the sun was setting, drove past Grandma's old house. The garden was in full bloom, evening primrose just starting to open. I didn't stop, just slowed down enough to see it, to remember. That night, I finally threw away my aunt's letter, the one from prison that had started my investigation. I'd kept it for 12 years. Long enough. It had served its purpose, guided me toward truth, helped me make choices. But now it was just paper, just history. I threw away Grandma's letter too, the one telling me not to regret my choices, because I didn't need it anymore. I'd learned what she was teaching, that life is complicated, that families are messy, that justice is rarely clean and forgiveness is rarely complete, and sometimes the best you can do is try to be honest about all of it. The evidence was gone, the letters were gone, but the story remained, not as a warning, not as a lesson, just as what happened, the truth of us. Imperfect and painful and still somehow beautiful. Like Grandma's garden, like those evening primrose that only bloomed in fading light. Sometimes the best things come from darkness, not despite it, but because of it. Because someone chose to plant seeds anyway, to water them, to believe that beauty was possible even in broken soil. That was Grandma's real gift, not her money or her sharpness, or even her survival. It was her stubborn insistence on beauty, on growth, on trying again even after betrayal. I carried that forward, in my work, in my relationships, in the way I tried to be in the world, not perfect, not untouched by what happened, but still planting seeds, still believing in next spring's tulips, still finding those moments of bloom in the fading light. And maybe that was justice after all. Not the kind that comes from courtrooms or punishment, but the kind that comes from living well, from taking what was broken and making something new, from being honest about the cracks and the repairs and the fact that healed things are never quite the same as unbroken things, but they're still whole, still here, still growing. That was enough. It had to be. because it was all any of us ever really had. This moment, this choice, this chance to plant something beautiful in whatever soil we'd been given. Even if that soil was complicated, even if the history was painful, even if justice was incomplete, and forgiveness was partial, and truth was messier than anyone wanted to admit. We planted anyway. We grew anyway. We bloomed in the fading light, and that was its own form of triumph. Quiet, imperfect, but real. So completely real.